Alright everyone, it's time for an important last-minute video here, the Libertarian argument for Donald Trump, because of course, Donald Trump is a Republican. Some of his views do not align, certainly with mine, or those of any mainline Libertarian. But I wanted to make a pitch as to why Libertarians should vote for him anyway, and I'm not going to bore you with the lesser of two evils thing. I am not the anti-third party sort. I'm not a Republican. I'm not really conservative outside of the fiscal sense. I think I have more in common with the left on certain social issues, and I think most libertarians do. By the way, it is a meme, the just vote two party because it's lesser of two evils. You're wasting your vote if you vote libertarian. That's not what I'm going to pitch. What I would suggest is that right now the Libertarian Party is in dire need of actual libertarians to run. When I look at Joe Jorgensen praising Facebook, for example, for censoring political groups because they have hateful views, while it is not a violation explicitly of the First Amendment for a private business to do that, the philosophical underpinnings of the country are severely anti that sort of behavior. The Constitution should not be seen just as a cut and dry document, but also as a philosophical statement. That is, that the founders of the country, with their classically liberal / proto-libertarian style of views, would have felt uncomfortable with that behavior. Now, I'm not going to make an appeal to the founders either. I'm saying the broad philosophical underpinning, the worship of liberty in the civic sense that led to really modern Western civilization, is undermined by such a move. Add to that the fact that these companies are not technically truly private at all. They're government subsidized. They platform government goods and services, things that taxpayers pay for. A libertarian might say, well, we should just abolish that. Very well. That's not the current principle by which they operate. Politicians have pages there. They speak to constituents. Constituents interact with that material and exercise their right to free speech on sites that already operate willfully and voluntarily under 230 and are routinely violating the spirit of that agreement as well. Not to editorialize content. For Joe Jorgensen, therefore, to applaud that behavior, that's not very libertarian. It's certainly not pro-free speech in the philosophical and more broad sense. I would say that Jorgensen's views on the border make absolutely no sense. You have essentially exploitation, again, by government-tied, contract-taking firms. You can, again, banter and argue that that shouldn't be happening and libertarianism means just a free-for-all of total laissez-faire capitalism, but that is not the current system. Insofar as the current system exists, it makes sense to limit that sort of behavior. Instead, you have predatory multinational corporations with no particular loyalty, by the way, to the United States itself, whose people are supposed to be represented by the elected officials themselves in the first place. You have a situation where they are arguing that they want open borders. They've been arguing for it for a very long time. I would say as well, in the broader sense, a state should be seen by any properly functioning individuals having two basic ideas behind it, two basic purposes. Number one, to prevent internal victimization, one person or group to another, inside the country. That's why you have courts, that's why you have law enforcement of some sort or another, systems like that, and a basic skeletal framework of regulation. It should be far more limited than it is, but it does have to exist in the legal and judicial capacity. The second purpose of the state is to prevent victimization by foreign groups or states, which is why you have a military apparatus of some sort. You have the capability of self-defense, which requires some sort of organized capacity to actually use it. We may have a utopian view that it would be a great world if we didn't have to pay any money to field a military. Unfortunately, the kind of weapon systems that are required today to be a fully functioning, self-defending nation require a state to administer them. Private civilians would not have the organizational capacity, for example, to field nuclear weapons, to field naval carriers, and so forth, without that centralized apparatus. What I would say is if they tried, they would be forming a state anyway. It just wouldn't be a state on paper. It would be sort of like mob rule, I suppose, at some point. The libertarian argument for Trump is that he more closely comports to the libertarian principle on multiple issues. On censorship, he speaks out against it. Now, has he done anything meaningful? Other than an executive order and a few studies, not a whole lot, but that's because the legislature is very, very slow by design, especially the Senate, where Senate Republicans have repeatedly attempted to prevent things meaningfully from happening. I would say as well, while I'm not going to make the lesser of two evils argument, His opponent does intend, it appears, if you take his statement seriously and assume that he intends to do what he says he wishes to do, it appears he intends to cause a Great Depression, and that government is essentially going to creep into every aspect of your life. Like it or not, and I don't like it, the United States remains a more libertarian model than virtually any other nation in the world on most measures. It has lower taxes than most of the developed world. It is more free market than most of the rest of the world. Self-defense, certainly, there aren't many countries where the official state apparatus recognizes a person's right to bear arms. We have the opportunity, if we re-elect Trump, probably to vastly extend the Second Amendment. If we elect Biden, it is very likely that two of the more conservative justices that have consistently been in favor of the individual right to bear arms especially, which I think, considering the riots and crime sprees going on right now, is outsizedly important, they probably, because they're elderly, they could croak. If Biden replaces them, the court goes back to being anti-gun, because we know Roberts is not a conservative on this issue. Roberts will side with the liberals. He acts like fucking Ginsburg when it comes to guns, practically. If we want more McDonald versus Chicago moments, if we don't want a depression, there is no other choice. And I would point out that Jorgensen is not a principled libertarian. The Libertarian Party and libertarianism as an ideology are not, at this point, the same thing. And what happened is very, very clear. The Libertarian Party, and I liked this idea at first, chose Gary Johnson, who I listed as the pragmatist, as the not fully total libertarian, who was capable of appealing to a broader core of people. He was more like a classical liberal in some ways. I hold to that, by the way. It was a good idea from this perspective. He got Weld on board because Weld is a fundraising giant. The Weld-Johnson ticket, unfortunately, while it managed to vastly expand its vote tallies, it was a very temporary thing, and it was prefaced partially on they made a lot of money. They were good at fundraising, they were good at public outreach. Jorgensen represents just an opportunist, in my opinion, who has taken the same basic model and is furthering her own ambitions thereby. Now, that's a very libertarian thing to do. It's very capitalistic. She's doing very well, I'm sure. But it's not helping the Libertarian Party in the sense of being viable, number one, because it's lost most of the support it gained under Johnson with Jorgensen, who's not a very likable person, it seems. And number two, it's not libertarianism anymore. It's basically, they're trying to take disaffected leftists and roll them over into a party that stands gung-ho for guns and wants to abolish taxation and return to a gold standard and stuff like that. Ron Paul, who's been a lifelong Republican, is more of a principled libertarian than the Libertarian Party's own candidate, and also considerably more coherent. Think what you will about his buy gold sort of shtick. I would say definitely. Rand Paul, again, a Republican, is arguably more closely associated with at least most aspects of libertarianism than many parts of the Libertarian Party. And it's a situation where I'd like to support the Libertarian Party in any election, including this one. But they don't have a libertarian candidate. There's no reason to vote for Joe Jorgensen. And of course, if a few 100,000 of those libertarians in vulnerable states vote for Trump, he's going to run away with the election, and then we can get back to business. Be better long-term for the Libertarian Party, too. We need to punish the people that have tried to take over the party to turn it into a little money-making scheme without having apparently a solid understanding of even what liberty is. They think that it's just cut and dry on a piece of paper, only refers to the state, and that's the ultimate limit of the First and Fourth Amendments. I totally disagree. That's like saying that if a corporation wants to, it can mandate that its workers have to disarm themselves. Well, if you want to work for our company that takes government subsidies out of your pocket, by the way, you have to have no guns or we're going to fire you. Would Joe Jorgensen be in favor of this? Apparently this would not be a problem, including if government individuals were co-opting and leaning on that business in the first place. It's basically a constitutional reach-around. It's like the FISA court system. A FISA court is just a judiciary body that no longer experiences the normal protections of the accused, and thereby has wider latitude to abuse people. It can completely discard the Fourth Amendment. It can completely discard the right to cross-examination. It can completely disregard the rights of the accused from top to bottom. And it's being misused by the corporate apparatus and the legal apparatus of a country that now has a far too bloated bureaucracy and too powerful a top-heavy government. Well, Trump has been ripping apart regulations. Trump has dropped taxes. Trump has dropped onerous burdens on businesses. That's more libertarian than anything the Libertarian Party at this particular time is doing. So I would urge you to vote for Trump as well. That's about all. Peace out.